Good afternoon. Today we have Patrick Skinner, a special guest on campus. He is from the Soufan Group, a security and intelligence consulting firm. And I have questions for him today regarding what it's like to work in that field and what it's like to be a former Lander student.
Good morning or afternoon.
Could you explain how being an English major was an asset in your career?
Well, it sounds odd to say that being an English major actually helped me with the job later on in the CIA, but it really did. I honestly believe that I got the job because I could interview well, and that was based on I was comfortable with words, and that came from being an English major and reading and writing so much. And then later on, once you got into the actual operations of I would be in Afghanistan or you name it, anywhere across the world. And I had to deal with people like you would dealing with a character in a book. You had to understand their motivation. You had to engage with them one-on-one, just like you would in a book. And so I had no special skills. I had no language. I had no technical ability. I had the ability to use language, and that came from being an English major.
Great. In the liberal arts, we focus on developing critical thinking and communication skills. To what degree are these skills critical to your job as a consultant?
Oh, they're huge. It's impossible to know the specifics of any specific problem. If you're never going to be an expert on everything. But if you have the ability to think critically, but more importantly, creatively, which helped when I was a creative writing major, it helped because you could understand possibilities, and you understood motivations, and you could see, and you could think, and then express yourself in narrative. And that sounds like an odd thing, but people understand information in narrative. Nobody talks in graphs. Nobody speaks in big data. And so you had to take this complex information, understand it, make sense of it, and put it into a story, or at least several stories, because one story is never the whole truth.
I've seen you on CNN, I've read you in the New York Times, and I've heard you on the radio on NPR. Now, I know that part of your career is to communicate with the media like this, but you also go into the field. How is your time split between these things?
It's if I'm doing my job right, I'm much more in the field than I am in media. Media helps if we're trying to actually present a narrative. Complex issues are very difficult to understand. And so a complex representation of a complex reality is no help to anybody. So if you can condense it, sometimes it comes across as a soundbite. But for the most part, if you can condense it down to an understandable narrative, that really does help the public understand. But more importantly, it helps policymakers who respond to. So I go on media to try to explain issues. It's not my job is not at media. I'm not paid by media. I use media to push the message of, should we be arming rebels in Syria? And yes or no, it's very complicated, so let's figure this out. I prefer to deal with governments and corporations on a local level. And so that's most of my job is trying to understand big problems, but dealing with individuals.
Okay, that's great. When I think of Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the places where you've been, I think of Mark Wahlberg. And it's probably not fair that he gets the credit and you're the guy that actually goes into these places and does the work. Give me one story.
Well, obviously, Mark Wahlberg is based on me physically. That makes a lot of, that's obvious, I don't have to explain that. But, I mean, I have to avoid specifics from my old job, but I will say that when it got exciting, it was always because I had made a mistake. It was never exciting because there was the intent. Like we wanted a bunch of explosions to happen or gunfire. If that happened, it was because I hadn't done my homework or I had planned something wrong. You normally wanted to be at a spot where nobody else was. And unfortunately, many, many times, you failed. And there would always be people around. It was very awkward. I would say that most of my stories involved me getting lost in foreign countries and asking people for directions that probably I shouldn't have asked for. It's usually not as exciting as you think, especially intentionally exciting.
Great. You are our hero as an English major. You will be the example in many discussions about careers. and I don't know if we can live up to what you've done.
Well,
But we really admire the example you set for our students.
it's a low bar for English majors. But really, I'll stress it again. I think I got the job with the agency. In fact, I know I did because I interviewed well. And I interviewed well because I had engaged with books. I'd never interviewed before. I've done all these things, and it was basically because I could read books. And not just literally, I mean, I could actually read and understand what I was reading. And so, I mean, outside of being a computer programmer, I think the most important skill set you could have is that being an English major, or at least understanding the point. You know, it's not just to be a lover of the word, it's to leverage the words to understand what's happening to you.
If we could talk about books for 1 minute and not about your career,
Yeah.
give me one book you think everybody should read.
A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor would be hands down. She's my favorite author. She's from Savannah, so I'm kind of biased. But that's the finest collection of short stories I've ever read. And I like short stories because it's harder, it's easier to read, obviously, but it's much harder to write and to condense a story into 15, 20 pages. And so I can think of no finer English version of short stories, and A Good Man is Hard to Find.
Great, and I'll ask you one more question about reading. Earlier today, I heard you say that you got your job with the CIA in part because you had been absorbed in The Economist. You were reading it on a daily basis. If you had to tell people one publication they should read every day right now, what would it be?
The Economist is pretty good, but it's expensive. Online, I would think there's no excuse. You should probably read the New York Times every day. You should read BBC. I wake up every morning at an ungodly hour at 5 o'clock, and I have an internet circuit. I have these sites, and it's 15 to 20 sites that I read in order, and some of them are in Arabic, most of them are in English, and it's just, you go from Gawker.com, superficial stuff that is really but interesting, all the way to New York Times, and I think that, especially with the way information's available today, I'd go with the New York Times and then work backwards towards infinity. I mean, it's everywhere. It's sad, there's no excuse to be ignorant anymore. In my day, it was obvious. I mean,
earlier today, I also heard you say that the biggest problem you see in Egypt and the Middle East is that people have nothing to do, that they have poor economies, people are hopeless. Is there anything, do you have any thoughts off the top of your head about the best way to approach these countries who have problems like that?
yeah, I mean, the answer is they need societal reform because their entire structure is set up so that they can't advance, but they also have economic concerns. I mean, in America, we think we have a bad economy, or we complain about roads, and all things are relative. But the more you travel, the more you realize that our problems are literally first world problems. My internet is not fast enough. Instead of, I've gone my entire life with school, and now I can't even get a job pumping gas. And that creates a lot of resentment. People, it's as if you were told, work hard for the American dream, and then as soon as you get to 20, we pull the rug out from under you, and you absolutely have nothing. And when I mean nothing, I mean nothing. I don't mean like I only have 15 channels and cable. I mean, I'm sitting in a home. I can't get married because I can't afford the wedding, so we're all piled together. And that's a recipe for extremism. And so most terrorism is fueled by ideology from the leaders, but when you trickle it down to the mass numbers, they're pragmatists. They just want to do something. They're bored. They want to belong to a group, which is the reason why anyone wants to do anything.
Okay, I believe that that's all the time we have today, but I want to say one more time thank you to Patrick Skinner. He's been great for our students today. He's great for Lander. Thank you for being here.
You're more than welcome.